Mr. Kleinzahler is an American eccentric, a hard man to pin down. Born in New Jersey, he writes poems that have a pushy exuberance and an expert recall of that state's tougher schoolyards. And he writes with elegiac insight about life's losers, the people he calls strange rangers, the addicted, insane, or destitute. Yet for all his gruffness and love of dive bars, he is no Bukowski. Mr. Kleinzahler writes most often in a strongly accentuated free verse that is among the most articulate and alive sounds American poetry is currently making. David Wheatley, in a review of the Hotel Oneira in The Guardian, offers a punchier summary when he says, quote, "This is dream work of a tough and streetwise hue." Prepare to be wowed by this lyrical alchemy from one of America's singular voices. Please join me in welcoming August Kleinzahler.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a great honor to have you here tonight. This is a little longer than you'd see in a bookstore, but a little less technical than you'd see in a poetry journal. So that's what we're aiming for here. I don't know how it'll go. We'll talk for about 75, 80 minutes. We'll take a little break in the middle. I prepared some questions. I'll ask him to read, but we don't know exactly how this will work out. It largely has to do with the interaction between us. So let's sit back and see how this goes. You are one of the most enigmatic poets, after all. The life of the poet. You've been publishing for more than 40 years, but did that kind of thing, the life of a poet, did that seem preordained to you as you were growing up? Did you think as a child, I'll probably be a poet?
Well, I would have preferred to have been the shortstop of the New York Yankees, but by the time I was 16 or so, I'd been bitten by it and smitten by it, the notion of being a poet.
Really? In high school?
Yeah.
You had good high school teachers?
Some of them, and I tried my hand at it, and I was excited. The act of it excited me.
But it's usually taught so badly. It's all like, what this poem is in code, trying to figure out what the code is, or the horrible scanning of lines. It sort of deadens one's appreciation. How did you escape that?
I didn't escape it, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It depends who's showing you how the lines scan and how iambic pentameter works and rhyme schemes. If it's a good teacher, that could be quite alluring. And the first poems I attempted were in meter and rhyme, a very awkward, broken up meter and rhyme, but that's what I was hearing earlier on.
Were your parents into poetry? Were they poetry readers?
No, but they were readers. They were novel and nonfiction readers. And they subscribed to the magazines of the day, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Harper's, and the Republic, so forth, and read the novelists people talked about, and they talked about them. So it was a literate household, and my older brother and sister, I was the baby, were readers. They didn't have TV until I came along when I was about 5 or 6, and the whole family thought I was semi-retarded because I would sit in front of it for hours. And they read for entertainment.
Your brother, Harris?
Harris and Laura. And Harris wrote, and my father wrote. He didn't finish high school, but he wrote, and he painted, and he collected antiques and paintings, and he dragged me through junk store, antique stores, auctions, and I thought that's how everybody grew up. And it wasn't a sophisticated household. They were very provincial people, but there were a lot of books and paintings and that kind of stuff around.
You've talked about the influence Harris had on you, your older brother.
Yeah, well, I loved him. He's my big brother.
And he went into a very different career than you did at first, right?
Yeah, he went to Wharton and worked as a financial analyst. He died quite young, but I don't think that's what he wanted to do, and I think it made him rather unhappy, but he was able to get work, and parents, society had those sorts of expectations. You put on a shirt and tie, and you go to an Ivy League school, and you go to an office in the morning, and like that. He wasn't cut out for that, but people forget how limited opportunities were. My father was a very creative, imaginative character, but it was a depression. It wasn't conceivable for him to go into the arts.
I wonder if you'd read a poem called The Crossing.
Right. Well, this is a rather emotionally loaded one. It's a dream about encountering my brother, who killed himself at the age of 26 or 27, and but I encounter him. I've encountered him those many years since in dreams, and I was close enough to waking with this dream that I was able to retain most of the backdrop and narrative and so forth. The crossing. To carry this across, then, like contraband from one country to another, the hour before dawn. The border outpost, half hidden beside a copse of laurel, quiet for the moment, the guard asleep or having headed home early before the change and shift. Senior enough to get away with such things, to slide back into bed beside his warm, sleeping wife. A lamppost, the light flickering amidst the trees, the mist still heavy. Imagine what we're spiriting across. Imagine what we're spiriting across as a large wooden tray, one with a glass cover. Perhaps like those trays filled with butterfly specimens one pulls from drawers in museums. Or better still, moths. Yes, moths, floating in the tray like pieces of fabric that, if touched, would turn to dust on one's fingers. Or, if you like, a sheet of papyrus, ancient, discolored, adorned in glyphs, like patterns in a lepidoptera's wing, floating atop a pool of solution, kept together only by dint of the liquid's surface tension. To carry you across from the shadow country, with its multitudinous stairwells, tiered rail stations and Victorian hotel lobbies, with their raft of private alcoves off to the side, into this harshly lit arena of insensate bleeding forms. I am, as whenever we meet, overcome. The tenderness and sorrow I feel in your presence, a kind of exquisitely sweet agony, unbearable nearly. How can you pretend to be half a stranger when we are brothers? How can you stay away for many months, years on end, only for us to meet up again like this, in one of these cloakrooms or pantries? The voices, lit chandeliers, and clatter in the drawing room next door, with me beseeching you, as I always do, please, you mustn't leave, not this time. And you, eyes averted, looking cornered, confused, until you slip away once more, retreating like a wounded animal into the bush.
Incredibly powerful. What's the process of taking a dream, vision, I suppose, and turning it into a crafted poem like that? The poem didn't come to you in a dream, right? The lines,
Well, I was aware when I woke up, as I mentioned, it was close enough to waking, where I had retained most of the injury, true, that's a Freudian slip. Most of the imagery and sequencing. So I immediately, because I'd had this dream before, and it's one of the most painful recurrent dreams I have, and I wanted to trap it, and it was trappable. It's a painful thing to trap, but in some ways it's cathartic. To be able to express that kind of feeling and sense of loss, almost betrayal, in imagery and language and imagery.
Right. He did everything he was supposed to do until, of course, his life fell apart. That is, he went to this college, he got the good job, all that. You then left. You left New Jersey. You left your family. In other words, did his life in some way determine the direction yours took?
I'd already gone out west, but his life was coming apart very dramatically, and I'd spent several months with him as it was coming apart, and he certainly intimated that he was going to check out one way or another, maybe go to a logging camp, but I was the one who wound up in the logging camp. But it was certainly no surprise. He'd gotten himself into a terrible bind, and he saw no way out. And we had a conversation very shortly before he killed himself, and I knew that's what he had in mind, and I booked a ticket east. But I don't know if it would have made any difference, but I got there too late.
Traveling across the country, across even the world, is a huge part of your poetry. In one of your poems you write, "Motion is not a condition but a desire to be outside oneself." Is that the appeal?
You know, I've read that, someone else quoted that, and it is an appeal. I like to move outside my quotidian orbit. It wakes me up and makes me feel more alive. And I also find travel is hugely educational. You encounter people and architecture and weather and that you wouldn't normally. It's very stimulating, and I'm a fiend for stimulation.
One of the places you went was Alaska, right?
Yeah.
When? How early was that?
That was 1973.
It was pretty exotic then to go to Alaska, wasn't it? I mean, it's still kind of exotic, but.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. I was in the Northwest. What I was thinking was that I'd make my stake.
What did that mean to you at the time?
Well, I'd get a lot of, I'd make some fast money. That's where it felt like I could, make some fast money, and then I'd save it up and I'd go to the south of France or Spain, like Ezra Pound, and go be a poet or something like that.
And how are you going to make this money in Alaska?
Well, I thought I'd make it in the bush or construction or fishing or canning or whatever, but as usual with me, I wound up at the Alaska State Museum on a government wage of about, which is a large government wage by American standards, but it was about $10 an hour. But I had my own set of adventures out there, and as usual, it wasn't what I intended, but it was a very rich experience, and I met some people who remain dear to me to this day, and And I was writing, and it was rich. It was a rich landscape in many ways to explore.
You've written a series of poems, or you've written poems with the title of The Traveler's Tales from time to time.
Right.
I want to know if you'd read one of them, chapter 34. Are they sequentially numbered? It seemed to me there were some numbers missing.
Yeah, I think I'm being rather playful with all this. But at some point, if I live long enough, they'll all come together. And
right here, would you read that one? Traveler's Tales, chapter 34.
Traveler's Tales, chapter 34. This is in Australia. The native whites are flat of head, especially small children who bark sharply and spit at any provocation. The dark race wears an earthen cast, a mix of sand and ash, and look out from under their brims, wary and dazed, as if for a long time hunted. Sun Microsystems is at one end, the bank towers at the other. In between, terror alerts are rotated with sportswear ads on the sides of bus shelters. If you see or hear anything out of the ordinary, it is your duty as a citizen to phone. One feels almost at home. And here, so very far away, another hemisphere facing on a distant ocean. A sea breeze called the Doctor arrives at 6, along with the stewardesses in their red caps and gauzy veils, filling up the hotel lobby and chattering away like exotic birds. The purpley neon of the bank towers does something marvelous over the river, with the magenta of the alto cumulus clouds vibrating off one another, until the Supreme Court gardens are suffused in a light, first spectrum violet, then Moorish blue, then back again. Dubai sky, offers the famous travel writer. He is standing at my shoulder, a dark, slight, genial man. We meet in such places as this. Every few years we cross paths far away from home. Although he seems not really to have a home except that of airports and a perpetual pre-dawn realm, lived out alone in this Asian city or that, unable to sleep, walking the streets, always in search of the red lantern, betokening the entrance to an unforeseen world. And that's Perth, Australia, and the travel writer is Pico Iyer, who you've probably heard of, who's a wonderful writer and a lovely person.
What draws you back to that subject again and again?
Well, you wake up on the Indian Ocean. I'm a country boy from Fort Lee, New Jersey. It gets your attention. It's different. The light's different. It's disorienting, which I like.
Right. I see that again and again in your poems.
Yeah.
I also see this strange mix between familiar and exotic things, sometimes pushed together in witty ways, as in this poem. That's all part of your method.
Part of the method, and it's part of how I see things and who I am. I do bring myself along on these trips with my ordinariness.
There are many poems about going home, and as one of the ways you travel is to go home. There are a number of powerful poems about going home. Some you go home, others you think about going home, some you dream about going home. Some of them are quite lovely, some of them are desperately sad.
Well,
and you still go home.
I don't go home. There is no home to go to.
Your mother's passed away?
My mother passed away a few years ago, and my sister and I sold the home, which was extremely traumatic. And I wrote a piece about that actually for the London Review of Books, and it was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life because having the house there, as the family did for 60 some odd years. And I was 60-ish, I think, 61 when we sold the house. It kind of kept me rooted to some kind of emotional solidity, and when that was gone, it was weird.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Did you still have friends there?
A few, not many. They're rather dispersed. I have a sister in Jersey close by, whom I see when I go back, and friends here and there down the shore, and in New Brunswick by Rutgers, and in the city. It's right across the river from Manhattan.
Was it a particularly lovely house, or was it mostly just the experience that you associated with it?
It was a brick Georgian knockoff kind of house with a slate roof and a gravel driveway. My folks bought for $17,000 in the '40s, and on a quarter acre, and a nice block on the Palisades, and it wasn't grand. It was, by modern standards, the rooms were quite small. But when I think of home, when I think of space, Bachelard would talk about poetics of space, something like that. It's and in my dream life, that is the space.
Right.
That is the primal space. That's where they took me from the hospital, and remained. And when I'd come to visit, except toward the end, I'd sleep in my bedroom.
In your old boy's bedroom?
Yeah, the wallpaper had calmed down quite a bit, but but it was the same room with the same trees out front, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I had that. I know what you mean. It
Yeah.
is very powerful. And you dream in that place for years,
Forever.
decades later.
Forever.
Maybe forever.
Yeah, I suspect so.
You know this poem well, I'm sure.
It's called 1975. This is a rewrite of a poem I'd written 20 years
I
earlier.
was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
There's another poem. I can't remember the title, but
I can't remember the title either, but
this is better.
this is better. That's why I rewrote it, because there was a poem in there. There was a better poem in there, and it's called 1975. Even the crickets are unnerving me tonight, and the smell of camphor in the warm room worse still. My woolens will outlast me. Home again from points northwest, a suitcase full of useless books and no prospects. There's a folk song that goes like that. Insipid, pathetic really, without the music. This appears to be a condition I shall not escape, a gravitational field to be suffered through all my days, like some wayward doomed alien. At least the folks are asleep, getting along in years. They shrug. A shrug means peace. The stomach knows when the clams are bad or worse. Perhaps that is truly the site for love, or where love takes root finally and sets up shop. I'd imagine something much less uncomfortable. The dirty oriole across the Hudson is New York. Jets sink into it. Here on the cliffs opposite, trees whisk themselves. The wind freshens for rain. Even George Washington, on the lam from Howe, hid out here. He ate and ran south. Ask any ghost along the Hackensack. It's late, very late, that I do know. Mother's bought new bed linen for the occasion, described on the package as duck egg blue. So clean and cool, I could be afloat on a lake. Thank you.
And captures that strange sense of comfort and disappointment about being home again. How old were you? 1975.
25. Not a picture, I can tell you that. There was no one, a boy that wouldn't please any parent.
You had no job, no prospects.
Nothing.
You dropped out of school.
Well, I had done. I'd gone back to school and finished, but I was a mess. No reason to belabor that. But I'm very. When I run into young people today, if I'm teaching, they're a bit younger and they're casting about. they always encounter a very sympathetic older person.
Another one here. Another one about going home here. It's quite nice. This is called Gray Light in May.
Got me reading only the emotionally charged ones. You know.
Sorry.
Gray Light in May, and this is again just taking a little walk around the corner from Bluff Road, just a couple blocks from the overlooking the Hudson, the tip of the Palisades, overlooking the Hudson River. Then it looks across to Harlem, Grant's Tomb, like that, around that part of New York. The soft gray light between rains, this enveloping light under a canopy of green, oak, chestnut, maple. Last night the moon, orange and full over Manhattan's west side. Edgewater below, so sleepy. The neighborhood asleep. My family asleep. Coming back here, how many years now? And the ride in from Newark, Manhattan looming over the meadows. The beauties of travel are due to the strange hours we keep to see them, which is a quote from William Carlos Williams. The soft, windless air, away now nearly 30 years. You can smell the tidal flats below. Passenger jets silent overhead in and out of Kennedy, LaGuardia, as if gliding across the night. My heart abrim, a glass of wine spilling over. The air like wine. I am a stranger to myself. The soft gray light, the still moist air. The azaleas in these yards under the canopies of leaves, fiercely abloom in this gray light, between rains, almost stereoscopic. The broad green leaves overhead as well. Painters know it, photographers too. The smell of lilac nudging my chest like the muzzle of a dog. The manner in which this gray light wraps itself around things, saturating them, bringing up the color. So much a part of me, so much of what is dearest, I can barely stand upright under the weight of it. The song of the wood thrush reverberates through the heavy air, and around its hidden columns. Who knows the Palisades as I do? Lilac and dogwood, flowering pear blossoms, mingling, drifting in gutters. How many years, for how many years, a stranger to my own heart. And again, that's Williams, who knows the Palisades as I do, and the strange hours are both from one of my favorite poems of his called January Morning. He'd often come to the Palisades. He lived in East Rutherford, about a half hour down the road. The Palisades are quite beautiful.
One of the things that makes that poem so powerful, of course, is the way you root these memories in the physical experience of the place and the way how it looks, how it smells. The smell of those lilacs, as you say, nuzzling your chest like a dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a
Pretty
great,
good, huh?
it's just a great line. Of course, there's another great poem about the lilacs and the memory of lilacs that we all know from Whitman. Yeah, I just think it's fantastic. Another one, it's the last one about going home that I'll make you read here.
No, I enjoy it. It's not the Bluff Road one, is it?
It's called The Family Album.
Oh. You're picking some interesting ones. You're a sharp guy, man.
This right there.
Okay. Earlier poem. Family album. Loneliness. Huge. Suddenly menacing. and no one is left here who knows me anymore. The Little League coach, his TV repair truck and stinking cigars, and Sol the butcher man, and the broken arm that fell out of the apple tree. Dead, dead or gone south to die warm. The little boy with mittens and dog posing on the stoop. He isn't me. And the young couple in polo shirts ready to pop with their firstborn, 4 pages on in short shorts and a beatnik top, showing her figure off at 16. 1955 is in an attic bookcase, spine cracked and pages falling out. Willow and plum tree, green pods from maple whirling down to the sidewalk. Only the guy at the hot dog stand, since when, maybe remembers me, or at least looks twice. But the smush-faced bus from New York, dropping them off at night along these avenues of brick, somber as the dead child and crimes of old mayors, lets off no one I know or want to. Warm grass and dragonflies. Oh, my heart.
You ever read an old poem and see things you really like or really don't?
I should have altered a line.
Which one?
Never mind.
No, this will not leave the room.
What stays at the Library of Congress?
Yeah. No, I wondered about that as someone who's been publishing for a long time. As you look back, do you think that really worked, or that does not work at all?
Well, sometimes I haven't read that in many years, and I was teaching. I teach a course in at Claremont. I teach a course at Claremont McKenna out west this semester, and one is the lost art of letter writing. And I was telling the kids, one of the beauties about writing is you're not up on a stage in front of 100 people, and 3/4 of the way through a poem you realize that's not right.
Well, here we are.
There we are.
No, it's
That's a technical thing. You would know the difference.
okay. It's we all have this experience, whether we go back to high school reunions or we go back to see our folks. We have this experience of looking around and we recognize everything, but we know we are not being recognized. That they've all moved on. That we're nothing to them.
It's like that corny Christmas movie. Was it with Jimmy Stewart? He goes back to the town and nobody remembers him.
Yes, so we all know this.
Yeah.
Wonderful Life. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's a very raw poem there. That ends very rawly too.
Well, we're in the raw mode here, man.
Let's talk about jobs. You've had so many jobs. You mentioned a few of them there. Some of them are really tough too, and they exposed you to a variety of people and careers that you would never have met had you gone to graduate school, immediately gotten a job, teaching poetry, and just stayed there the rest of your life in the ivory tower. And I wonder if that experience, it clearly enriches your poems, right? The people we see in your poems, people you would not have met had you had that sort of career. Here's a fabulous poem and a career I'd never thought of. The Sausage Maker?
Sausage Master of Minsk. I actually started this when I was in Alaska, and I finished it a couple of years later, 3 years later in Montreal, and it has nothing to do with, well, it does have a bit to do with Montreal because I lived right off St. Lawrence Boulevard, where there are all sorts of wonderful charcuteries and sausage shops, and I love that kind of food. And anyhow, the Sausage Master of Minsk. I was Sausage Master of Minsk. Young girls brought parsley to my shop and watched as I ground coriander, garlic, and calves' hearts. At harvest time, they'd come with sheaves, hags and babushkas, girls plump as quail, wrapped in bright tunics, switching the flanks of oxen. Each to the other, beast and woman, goggle-eyed at the market's flow. My art is that of my father. Even among stinking shepherds, bean-brained as the flocks they tend, our sausages are known. The old man sits in back, ruined in his bones, a scold. So it was my trade brought wealth. My knuckles shone with lard. Flecks of summer savory clung to my palms. My shop was pungent with spiced meat and sweat, heat from my boiling pots, my fretful labors with casings expertly stuffed. Fat women in shawls muttered and swabbed their brows. Kopecks made a racket on my tray. But I would have none of marriage, the eldest son, no boon. Even with the shop's renown was I to my parents. Among mothers with daughters, full-bottomed, shy, I was a figure of scorn. In that season, when trade was a blur, always from the countryside there was one, half-formed, whose eyes, unlike the haggling matron's squints, roamed and sometimes found my own. And of her I would inquire. Before seed time, they always returned. Tavern men speak freely of knives, of this, of that. Call me a fool. For in spring I would vanish to the hills, and in a week return, drawn, remote, my hair must, interlaced with fine pubescent yarn. You asked me to read it. I didn't.
What? You know that you know, you know that guy so well. How?
It's me. The imagination is a wonderful thing. Well, I like sausages.
That poem is so full of the smell and the feel and the matter of that shop.
I spent a lot of time in those sausage shops.
Really?
And in fact, I was just in Montreal this summer, where I hadn't been in many years, with Marcy, my partner, and I took her to my favorite sausage shop, and there's a little picnic table out in front. It's Romanian, and I got the spicy Romanian sausage, and with the mustard and the spicy mustard, and I was just sitting there. I said, "This is the best goddamn thing you've ever had." And she said, "Yeah, it is."
And what makes that poem work, of course, is that mysterious week, the week pursuing the girl. That's just a brilliant move in the, if I can call it, the plot of that poem. How did that come about?
You know, I honestly don't know. I'm not being coy or evasive. As poems develop, and you've read this, they do take on a life of their own, a sort of logic of metaphors. Hart Crane, I think, would talk about it, and you have to give them enough free rein to go where they want to go, because it leaves you. It leaves one's will, which is, I think, that one of the most exciting aspects of writing poetry. You kind of tap into a larger, or it feels like a larger consciousness, and you can't make it do what it doesn't want to do, and which can be problematic and disappointing and blow up whatever you had intended. But sometimes it turns out better than you could have managed if you'd imposed your will on it. This is what I want it to be. Well, it's better than what you want it, and you'll see down the road.
We'll talk about another weird profession here.
That wasn't a profession. That was I've had enough weird professions. I would have liked to have.
Maybe not a profession of yours.
Yeah.
Sports rap.
Oh, yeah. I wrote this in St. Louis, and
St. Louis. Did you teach at WashU?
No, I had a 2-week gig at St. Louis University not long ago, maybe 3 years ago, and they're baseball crazy there, and the character at the end is Tony La Russa, whom some of you baseball fans might remember. He's got a big hair. He's obviously very pleased with, and as would I be under this circumstance. And one shouldn't give too much background. But I'd just driven across country from San Francisco to St. Louis.
Oh my gosh!
With a friend from Madison, Wisconsin, where he was headed, where he grew up, and we're friendly in San Francisco. And he dropped me off. Sports rap. Who would have credited their late August collapse? They flourish like jumpweed over these punishing summers, or did do. Adversaries going faint here alongside the river. 18-wheelers bust across the interstate, devouring horizon, tuned to the one same station, signal fluttering, as this distressing tale unfolds, inning by inning, game by game. Do you suppose in the beginning there was an actual Denny for whom the tuna melts, iced tea, and assorted sides were meant as commemorative, an act of devotion? Surely someone has written on the subject at length. But is it not pleasing to think of a corporeal Denny, adored child, doting granny, down-home deep dish Salome, living in one of those clapboard shitholes behind a silo, playing at quoits, kibitzing, shrieking like an infidel set alight? Skip, you must be as baffled as anyone. The veteran field general gazes into the near distance. You know this look, cerebral, resolute, contempt, big hair threatening to erupt from under his cap. The cell is vibrating in his left front pants pocket. 3 likelihoods, none of them at this moment inviting. Who attends to these staged postmortems on TV? Inebriates? The eviscerati? Denny? You? Me? I wish I knew the answer to that one, Pete. I do. I really, truly do. I wonder, a lot of educated people here, is it corporeal or corporal? Talking about the material. Corporal? I said it right? hate to do this, on, like I tell the kids, you don't want to do it in front of 100 people.
Denny? You mean Denny's?
I mean Denny's.
The fast food, well, the sit-down fast food restaurant.
Well, you can stand up if you want.
Yeah. Surely someone has written about this subject at length. I really don't think so.
Oh, I bet someone's wrote, the founding of Denny's and
Stuart Onan, maybe on the closing of Red Lobster or something like that. Why do you? I mean, why would you write a poem about a subject like that?
Crossed my mind because I'd probably gone into a Denny's and we're driving across Kansas and maybe there was a Denny. Someone's mom, dog, start a restaurant. What do you call the restaurant? Well, you do call it after someone, sweetheart, a loved one, it might be some bizarre acronym, but
You've spoken somewhat dismissively about academic poets and the way poetry is taught and the way poets are kept by universities. Are you recalling any of these comments now?
I often speak off the cuff.
Were you misquoted, perhaps? What's wrong with the workshop culture, with the way poetry is taught at expensive graduate schools and colleges?
Well, one, you can't teach it. it's like teaching someone to be happy or.
But it's done everywhere. People pay tons of money for this.
Exactly, it's a business. It's a business worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's why universities do it. It has nothing to do with anything really, except it's a business, and
good people come out of some of these programs.
very few.
Really.
But in spite of the programs, people do come out. The other end, I certainly discourage bright undergraduate students who have talent to avoid.
You would not tell them to go.
No, I would tell them to travel and sleep with people more interesting than they are, and read and.
Did you say breed?
No, I didn't say that, and I caution them against that.
What did you said read?
Read.
Read. Okay.
It rhymes with breed, but it's very different.
They're so different. It's much cheaper to read.
Oh, yeah, right. Like that.
You, about 10 years ago, you wrote a really funny essay in Poetry Magazine. It's quoted all the time. I'm sorry to make you talk about it again. I'm sure you're sick of it, but it's just too funny to ignore.
Oh, no, it's a gift that keeps on giving.
You suggested, among other things, that it was about Garrison Keillor. And you
That's
suggested...
a beloved figure
Yes.
in America.
You suggested that Keillor's daily bit on public radio called The Writer's Almanac could be used by the Army as psychological torture to break the will of terrorists. But I bet most people in this room listen to that and kind of enjoy it most days and think it acquaints them with poets they hadn't heard of, or it reminds them of poets they loved, certain quaint anniversaries. What's so bad about that? What's so bad about the Writer's Almanac?
It's like, it's served up like a geritol. This is good for you. This will help you through your day and make you a better person. And if you're anxious, perhaps it will relax you. And that is not the function of art. I'm sorry. Art does quite the opposite thing. And even when he reads marvelous poems, it's still with this gruesome, weird Cub Scout masterly drone that creeps me out.
You saying that as I avoid Keillor's poetry moment on the radio as I avoid sneezing, choking, roomy-eyed passengers on the streetcar.
I do. That's what I do. And when I just flip the dial. I listen to a lot of radio. That's my favorite medium. And sometimes I'm not paying attention, or I'm listening to the news on public radio or something, and then all of a sudden, there's Johnny, and then and they're like, yeah.
For many people, I bet for most Americans, that's all the poetry they're going to get.
Well, good. Good for them.
But you think on balance, it's a negative influence. It gives us an impression of poetry as a sort of relaxing, comforting, soothing art.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I suppose it's harmless. It's like traveling through Louisiana and turning on Christian radio in the morning. It's okay. God forgives you, and I'm sure He does. And you should be forgiven. We should all be forgiven. Well, most of us, and not for that, but for most of it.
Has Keillor ever read one of your poems for the Writer's
He did. I was unaware of it, but and he pronounced my name, and he knew better. It's Kleinzahler. Put me in my place.
Back at you. Yeah.
And I think he put me in one of his anthologies.
Yeah.
But that's not going to help.
Wasn't enough.
I'm not going to get off.
You can't be bought off.
No,
You've never met him.
No, never mind. No. I have no interest in. I'm sure he's a wonderful person. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so beloved.
Let's take a little break. We'll be right back. Just stand up. You need to stand up too.
I can. How are you?
What's that? That picked up on my
Lovely to
mic?
see you. Let me stand down.
Really?
Yeah, I'm having a good time.
We're having a good
He's
time.
always been very charming.
All right.
It's good. You're right on it.
Okay.
So how long are you going to stay?
Good to hear that.
I fly to Austin tomorrow.
You've read
for
this
reading in
essay,
Texas,
sure.
and then back to Claremont on Saturday. So
Oh,
it's bang bang.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
Bring the lady next time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you come to
Let's
San
see what the
Francisco.
other Marcel in
Yeah.
the world is. Yeah.
I'd like to introduce her to the original Marcel.
That'd be great.
It's better yet. Yeah, we can meet in Charleston.
Yeah. We'll figure it out. Hey, how are you?
How are you, man?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah. You're looking.
Okay, that's it. We're not done. Sit back down.
I'm sorry. Cindy sends you love.
Oh, good. The kids are probably all grown up.
Chico Aragon said for us to say
Oh,
hello to you,
yeah.
Bill McGraw and Wally.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yes.
We did,
That's fascinating. I never knew that.
from a Christmas maybe 4 years ago near your house.
Yeah, the Zazzies.
Yes, yeah.
I remember.
Yes.
Well, wonderful. Give Chico my love, will you?
Yeah, he's so bad tonight. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, long ago I read this. And
Okay.
Don't get too far. You're on wire.
Don't say anything. You should say hello to the blonde woman sitting next to you because she's a neighbor.
That's
When she
fascinating.
turns up again.
That's I never knew that. You can hear echoes of the poems in the letters,
Okay.
in the diaries,
no, literal.
literal lines. That's amazing. I'm just hearing more about Williams Wordsworth's stealing from his sister.
I think it was that poem.
Yeah.
He didn't. His sister wasn't.
No,
Didn't feel hard done by. She.
it wasn't an active theft, really.
Oh. Okay, doke.
Well, I wanted to talk about music. You've been an active music critic for years, and wrote a column, right? Was it in San Diego?
I wrote a column for the San Diego Reader for about 3.5 years.
Do you play an instrument?
I don't, regrettably. I don't have that aptitude, and
But you love it.
I do, and I would have loved to have had that aptitude.
There's music all through your poems, and some of it's quite funny. Sometimes you write about musicians, sometimes about their music, sometimes just the experience of hearing music. There's a line here, the oboist upstairs, why does he insist on practicing during my afternoon nap? Why does it always have to be Ravel?
I altered that. She's actually a bassoonist,
Bassoonist.
but I didn't want to hurt her feelings.
Did you love music before you loved poetry, or are they intertwined in your mind in some way?
Well, they're naturally
Right.
Connected, but I don't think I became a serious music
Well, you
music
are.
listener until later. Later on, when I think when I began listening to jazz more seriously in my 20s, and then I kind of went off the deep end and got interested in all sorts of music and remained so. And it's very it's endlessly pleasurable.
You write in one poem, everything sounded good in 1957.
Well, I think the culture was at its apex. Someone wrote a book, 1958, a few years ago, talking about. I'd already been of that opinion, and he went on about what was happening in 1958 and why American culture was at its apex. And it's actually not that interesting a book, but I would say between 1956 and the early 60s, American culture topped out.
And you've got a series of poems called The History of Western Music. It's just a tremendous variety in those poems, too. What inspired that series? And will you ever publish them, as a series?
Yeah,
Now they're kind of sprinkled around, right?
Yeah, if I live long enough and get enough pages. That had a very specific beginning. I was writing my column, so music was in my head all the time. A weekly column. It's interesting, no matter how contemptuous you may feel about this or that columnist in the Post or the Times or whatever. Knocking off 1 or 2 columns a week, 50 weeks a year, 40 weeks a year is it's a lot of work.
Just brutal. It ruins your life.
Yeah, I mean, you wake up. You wake up in the middle of the night, but I was on a reading tour of sorts. It sounded more glamorous than it was in Britain and Ireland, and for some reason they were playing the Adagiato from Mahler's Fifth Symphony. I think there must have been some big Muzak contract across Britain and Ireland. So everywhere you went, and
You mean you'd hear it in grocery stores and things? Is that what you're saying?
airports, public buildings. At the same time, in Britain or in London, I think they were having Frank Sinatra Week or something, because it was, and Sinatra was every pub you walked into on television late at night. They had reruns of Tony Rome, and this or that, and so everywhere I went, it was either Mahler or Frank Sinatra. So
Together again.
that great old pair, and so I had to get this strange phenomenon, because I was going through these very different sorts of landscapes, some ethereal, like the one I mentioned in the mountains outside of Dublin, and less ethereal in London, and so these old fashioned textbooks, a history of Western music, a history of this and that. So I figured it's a history of Western music, and then I just assigned an arbitrary number to it.
Let's hear a few of these.
And continued for the next 15 years to do that.
This one's not numbered. Does that mean it's the first one?
Yes.
Great.
This is the one I was talking about.
Okay.
April of that year in the one country was unusually clear, and with brisk northeasterlies straight from the Urals. Their ancient region at long last succumbed and laid to rest after much ceremony. Sinatra was everywhere that spring, in the hotel lobbies, toilets, shops. Fly me to the moon, you make me feel so young. Name it. On TV, a computer-generated Weimaraner sang, I Did It My Way, in a gravelly barroom baritone. He only weighed 130 pounds, Ava Gardner was to have remarked, soaking wet. But 100 of those pounds was cock. Whereas the season before, in the other country to the west, no matter into which room you walked, it would have been the heart-wrenching adagiato from Mahler's Symphony No. 5. Only a small country, it had endured a long, famously tragic history. Still, it was more than passing strange. Not halfway through your plate of mussels, the tremblingly adagiato, showering you with the debris of Gustav Mahler's tortured soul. True, wife Alma was a troublesome slut. We know this of her and choose to forgive. But what of this late romantic excess, this anthem of the Habsburg twilight in a cruelly served and windswept land? We'd only lately come over the Sally Gap across the bogland, down from the glen, and were walking slowly along the lower lake of Glendalough. Afternoon had turned toward evening, and with it came a chill. And with the chill, a mist had begun to gather over the lake. "This is a haunted place," I heard her say. It was quiet then. We were the last ones there. Only a patch of bird song, only the wind. Unheeded, from somewhere out of the blue, "Liberace," she said, and nothing more. We continued on our walk and listened, if just to the silence. This would have been an hour St. Kevin knew and savored before retreating to the gatehouse and into the monastery for evening prayer. One can imagine a stillness forming around him there, like those halos of gold or ochre that surround the sacred figures in ancient frescoes. Much as they do with Lee and one of his brocaded lame jumpsuits, with its sequins catching the spotlights, enorbing the performer in brilliant rays as he smiles coquettishly to the Vegas crowd, then turns to deliver the first in a series of thunderous glissandos, somehow finding his way back to a climactic, magnificently rousing chorus of that million-seller and timeless classic, Moon River.
It's really good. It's really funny, too. When you wrote this, you didn't know it'd be a series.
I didn't, but I kept traveling, and I still had that column in my head a lot, and it was a fun way to travel because there's often a musical connection to the environment you're traveling in.
Right, and it's completely incongruous as it is in this
Yeah.
poem. And
Right.
yeah, the history is such a clever way of encompassing it. Now, this poem may be the most recent of the history of music poems. Do you think?
There have been some since.
More since then? This is certainly a more recent one, though.
Right. I mean, there's some. This is my most recent book, but I've published a couple, one or two since.
This is a very different poem.
I hope so. I try to. I don't like revisiting the same place particularly. Although, as you pointed out, I seem to. There are themes like going home, but. History of Western Music, Chapter 44, Bebop. Yahtzee, Yahtzee, Yahtzee! At Rapunzel's fungible ball, the most glittering gala of all, the vedettes and babettes scarf down crepe Suzettes, orange butter spray paying the walls. What a feast, what a fete, scamps vamping away till last call. Yahtzee, Yahtzee! Hippity-hopsy, Strombolinas, Strombenzellas, combustible tattersall, a headache to even recall. So much effervescing Bouzette lost first her courgette, her silver barrette, her earrings next, you might say, her bearings wobbling as if ready to. At Rapunzel's jungly, even the discreet left their feet. Rapunzel is fungible. Varlets at the gate, loath to wait, tantrums broke plates. A proper Stromboli-strewn brawl. Yahtzee, Yahtzee! Sweet dude dropsy. Quiddity's itched, a timidity's twitch, toggle switch bobble. Rob Pete to pay, gobble, toot sweet, move your feet and try not to fall. Yahtzee, Yahtzee! Reet petite, tater totsie, a ramped up dance called the cha-cha-fo bachi, chocolata, chocolita, ticcolata, bamba, I haven't read this before, bambaga, this is shocking, bambaga bonga, gabum gum, gahubble bubble samba, strumbolito escondido, absolutely tutti frutti, hamarubi, picabucci, slofo bachi, syncopated commotion, addled emu shunned, Yahtzee, Yahtzee, Yahtzee! Rapunzel, let down, you're the hottest ticket of all, glittery, jittery, Rapunzel's fungible ball. And the Yahtzee, I suppose, are like rim shots in a book.
That's a remarkable poem. You actually, except for when you stopped, you read it really spectacularly. I thought, it's so much like music. I mean, everything that what you write is musical, but you know what I mean? You're really representing the sounds of instruments with the words. This other poem we were much more aware of the sense of the sentences and what was being said. We were building themes. We were looking for wit. This is a totally different kind of poem.
Yeah, I was trying to get that the tumbling, propulsive aspect of bebop, and the quoting for different bits and sort of leaking out here and there, and like that.
Yeah, you could all see it too. It's a. I wondered about that as I read some of the poems. Your strange and remarkable diction, the range of words and references, it's really remarkable. There's a poem about that whole process.
I meant when I was talking about interpolating bits and pieces of other songs while they're going through the jazz piece they're playing, as Charlie Parker does. You get little snippets of this or that.
Right. You write in a poem called Summer Journal, which I can't find, sorry. I lie there struggling to remember a word. It takes a while, but it's not far. As I begin to doze off, it comes to me, as so many things do in this condition of mind. It was necessary that I find a word. Whatever else happens in the course of the day, the important work has been done. And the word you were looking for there is Zamboni.
And that was true. I was in this hypnagogic or hypnagogic state where a lot of things happen, by the way, poetry, scientific inventions and whatnot, that place between sleep and waking. And there was, I don't know if you've had this experience, but there was a word, and the word encapsulated a feeling, and although it was a nonsense, it had no connection to anything, it was a specific word. And I struggled for a while with it. You can, one tries to sort of ride this hypnagogic condition to keep it going, because you don't want to wake up and you don't want to slip away. It's a fascinating place to tease out, I think, for an artist, for anybody really. And then I found it, this ice machine word, and
Was it satisfying or was it disappointing?
oh, it was wonderful.
Have you had the experience though, where you think the right word's out there, but then you find it's not, doesn't?
Once I and this took years to find. I don't know if you can say this in Washington D.C., but it was the 1970, and I was tripping with my brother, and we were at a friend of his house, and I was very overwhelmed by the drug LSD, and this is all okay, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
A long time ago.
And there was this word, and I knew the word. If I knew this word, it would unlock the everything. And I literally spent years recomposing that moment, getting myself to that place. And one day, it came to me.
What was the word?
Jumpster banister.
Is that even a word?
No. And I was tripping, and but there was a banister, I remember, and it had nothing to do with anything, but it encapsulated all wisdom, and
that had to have been a little disappointing.
it was a great relief. It was like if you've had cats, you watch it with the hairballs. But I want you to know, and it says a lot about me, that I did pursue that literally for years, and how I found it, goodness knows, but yes, it was usually satisfying.
In another poem you write, how like an intoxicant, the way words come loose of their moorings and fall apart, little bits of them all over like an airliner wreck, spread across the phrenologist's chart.
You read that very well.
Phrenology shows up in your poem several times.
I'm fascinated by a lot of that late 19th century
Junk.
quackery, Yeah, and I like the style of those writers too. There's this great formality and sentence structure and so forth.
Yeah.
Earnestness of tone.
Yes, the sense that they were doing something scientific.
Yes.
Yes. Something they weren't at all. What's our time like, Rob? 8:30. Okay. And the time just changed. So at our house, half the clocks are ahead, half are back. We never know what time it is.
You live in Arizona?
No. We just don't know how to change half the clocks.
Oh, yeah.
So we just put up with it for 6 months, and then we're back. So, there's a lot of wit. We've heard a lot of wit and music in your poems, but there is, as we began at the beginning, some unspeakable sadness too. In one poem, you ask, "What sort of life have I led, that you find yourself, an adult male of late middle age, about to weep among the avocados and citrus fruit?" That's autobiographical.
Maybe. That's a breakup poem.
Breakup poem. Are you married now?
I don't think so. No, but I'm happily together with someone.
Nice. In a poem called Hollyhocks in the Fog, you write, "There is nothing further to be known. The fog has taken over the world, and with night settling in, all that has ever been is gone. Gone, but for the sound of the wind." That's a really dark place.
Not so much. That's summer in San Francisco, and it's which can be pretty bleak as tourists find out. But it's. I was thinking of the nothingness. I'm very much interested in Taoism and the sense of nothingness that behind all material phenomenon, and it was actually rather comforting.
It reminded me of one of Emily Dickinson's poems, which ends, "When the winds take forests in their paws, the universe is still." There's a lot of wind in your poems, a lot of bad weather in your poems.
I like the weather, and no point writing about good weather. It's all the same, like happy families. Right?
It's also weird to me the way despair, the way a poem can express despair and at the same time sort of work against it. It can both make that despair more articulate and yet sort of comfort us at the same time. Several of your poems do that. You're interested in, was it a religious house you grew up in?
Not at all. They would pretend when their parents were around to be more religious than they were during holidays, but no, they couldn't have cared less. And none of my siblings, neither I or my brother or sister, have any religious feelings.
But now you've been studying, or you're interested in Eastern philosophy.
Yes, I studied that in college, and I was interested. Actually, I had a rather interesting high school teacher who taught us a bit of Far Eastern history and philosophy, and then when I went to Wisconsin, and I wound up majoring in Asian studies. And
was it more than just academic? Did it really move you? Did it speak to you?
Absolutely, particularly Chinese and Japanese poetry and landscape painting, Sung and Tang, Ming landscape painting. I'm very affected by. And that happened early. I think one of the earliest experiences of getting very excited by poetry was at the New York Port Authority at 175th Street when they had little bookstores they used to have. And there were a couple of, there's a book of Kenneth Rexroth's 100 Poems from the Chinese, and also New Directions book, and 100 books from the Japanese, and 100 poems from the Japanese. And that really fascinated me, and it has never ceased to fascinate me.
You should read a poem about the afterlife.
The hereafter?
Yeah.
I like to read this one. The hereafter. At the gates to the hereafter, a rather drab affair, might as well be a union hall in South Milwaukee, but with shackled, sweating bodies along the walls, female chiefly and not at all miserable, straining like bored sultanas at their fetters, each of them singing a separate song. A Semitic chap, the greeter, I suppose, gives me the quick once-over, and most amused he seems to be. Has me figured. Not unlike a gent I met only last week, a salesman at a stereo shop on Broadway. So, he says, nothing more. So, Buttons, says I, in a cavalier mood, and why not? Ushers me into a tiny cinema, two-seater, really quite deluxe. A great big Diet Coke in the cup holder, fizzing away. Okay, he asks. I nod and the film unrolls. A $20 million home movie it is, featuring yours truly. At the foot of the stairs with the dog, mounting Josette in a new Smyrna love nest. A fraught kitchen showdown with Mom. The suicide, car wreck, home run. You know what these things are like. The outlandish hairdos, pastel bathroom fixtures. The editing is out of this world. The whole shebang in under an hour. The air raid drill on Wednesday morning, 1957, when Tito wet his pants. There I am, beside myself with laughter, miserable little creature. The elemental slow-motion machinery of characters forcing house. Even with the fancy camera angles, jump cuts, and the rest, might as well be a chain of short features. Animal husbandry, sexual hygiene, Lisboa by night. What a lot of erections, voidings, pretzels, bouncing the ball against the stoop. She really did love you all along. These jealousies and rages of yours, like a disgusting skin condition that never entirely goes away. You, what catalogs of failure, self-deception. And then the lights come back on. Likewise, the choir's splintered polyphony, with its shards of Sprechzimmer, the ronettes, whatnot, and in the air around us, something like the odor of a freshly spent cartridge, when my minder asks brightly, how about another Coke?
Is that what awaits us?
Is that?
Is that what awaits us?
I hope so. Could be worse.
Yeah, could be much worse for some of us. This is Washington, after all. Oh, it's a very witty poem. What inspired a poem like that?
Well, I was in a stereo shop on Lower Broadway shortly before I wrote that, and so that was in my head, and he was an amusing sort of high-pressure, zany Israeli guy, I think. And then a bunch of other stuff accumulated around there, and so it's often a combination of what's been stewing and for a while, and then bits and pieces of what are in your more immediate consciousness, and then, as I said, when the thing starts going, who knows what's going to come off the shelf and get in the mix.
I'd like to end with some love poems. I didn't associate you with love poems.
Most don't.
But as I read all your poems, there were many really lovely love poems. You agree? You write some love poems? Well, one's called Love Poem, so you'll have to give me that one at least. But
one does fall in love.
Yeah. If you can, you write about it. Here's one called Anniversary.
Right. Thank you. I'd like to read this one. The setting here is Austin, Texas in the summer, where it's very hot. You'd figure the hawk for an isolate thing, commanding the Empyrean, taking his ease in the thermals and wind until that retinal flick, the plunge and shriek, cruelly perfect at what he is. With crepe myrtle igniting the streets and flowering pansy underfoot, I'd get out there just after dawn each day, before the sun made it over the mesquite and honey locusts. Cliff swallows rocketed low over grass, dragonflies darted above. Every day, on the heels of first bird song, Juicehead sleeping rough by the culvert. Before the heat, before the ebb and flow of cicada whir swallowed the world, when the crepe myrtle was still in bloom, when it was the flowering pansies' time in the park in untended lots, and still a touch of cool in the air. I remember once a red tail perched close by on a branch or utility pole. Maybe he came down for a better look, but I think it was so that I might better see him, who reigned over these few acres and beyond, and what it was about him so overmastering. An ugly sheen encouraged some gold in his russet mantle. His belly was white. Look at me, he seemed to be saying, seemed to be insisting. Behold a pure, wild, heartless thing. Beautiful and horrible, nothing in between. I one day saw him tearing at his prey. He was in the crook of a tree, low and close at hand, fixed on it, drunk with it, mercilessly at it. The sound like a cleaver tearing through meat. Cruelly what he was, nothing else. But on another day, not long after, I heard him perched high on a branch, crying out in distress piteously, "Ki-ar! Ki-ar!" A harsh, descending sound, and unrelenting. Ki-ar! Ki-ar! Panicked or wounded, terrible in his dismay, until suddenly from some other corner of sky, another hawk flew down to join him, not right there on the same branch, but on another close by. And soon after that, off they flew together, drifting, spiraling, higher and higher in partnered loops, wheeling and diving, enraptured by all they were able to do, not as separate beings, but as two. I'm going to Austin tomorrow.
That is a beautiful, beautiful poem.
Thank you, sir.
It's surprising. It's repeatedly delightful. The tremendous tension.
Am I not flesh? Do I not bleed?
No, it just works so well. It does so many things that you do so well in there. Here's one called Love Poem.
Oh, you like that? That's an old one. As long as a cat, it's a love poem. As long as the cat comes home and the skinheads keep to their concrete shell over the fence, screaming, "Break your face!" Smashing empties. What need is there to worry or come undone? So the wolf slips in, cutting through us like cheese, soft cheese, an emulsion of blood and cheese. Except for the radio tower close by, blighting, "Ruby, my dear," till you shift in your chair and it's right, both speakers, all there. Poor monk, dying at the Baroness's on the hill above Weehawken. Night after night, cars sluicing into the tunnel below, into the city, fanning lights across the broad river, the west side throbbing across black water. Out of notes, dying.
A more difficult poem, I think, to hear once, but so spectacularly complex. And the references all over the place, from the skinheads to Monk. Fascinating, again. And one more, a wildly romantic poem.
Jeepers. Some of these I forget I've written, which isn't always a terrible thing. A Valentine regarding the impracticability of our love. Evel Knievel, Robert Craig Knievel of Butte. Now that one, that wild. The crack up at Caesar's Palace in '68, then trying to clear the 13 Pepsi trucks in Yakima, and just down the road here at the Cow Palace. You could tell by the way he wore his hair in that white kid leather jumpsuit with fringe. An ordinary man doesn't jump the Snake River Canyon with nothing underneath his ass but a two-wheeled, fin-stabilized X1 Sky Cycle and a 7-figure guarantee from some macher in L.A. Darling, I've walked away from a record to myself, or crawled, and earned the name of fool full sore. But let's take off this one last time. No net, no harness, no nothing underneath to break our fall. The animal spirits that from pure blood arise are what get us aloft, and the fuel by which we fly. So hold on, baby, we're lifting off. Don't look down, your head will swim, and don't let go. Once in the air, we're on our own. They'll all be watching, assembled below. Come on, love, let's give the punters a show.
Was this given to someone as a Valentine?
Yeah, and that went up in flames too.
That's kind of where I was going with this. Yeah, I mean, who compares his relationship to Evel Knievel?
Well,
You should have known.
if you live with yourself that long, you start comparing yourself to Evel Knievel.
All three of those poems do something which I think is so remarkable in this tremendous range. In the poem about the hawks, it begins with such violence, the tearing apart of this other smaller bird, or rodent, I suppose, and then it ends with this beautiful image of them flying off together. The other one has the skinheads, and this poem, Evel Knievel. But then there's a line from Paradise Lost dropped in there too. That's an enormous range.
Well, I always tell people it wasn't unusual for me when I'm in New York. It wasn't unusual to go from the Museum of Modern Art to a tavern with the fellows, with their baseball caps turned backwards, watching the Yankee game. It's just I move in and out of these different environments, and I don't naturally, and I enjoy drawing from all different sorts of around what I've read, what I've seen, it's all there.
It makes reading the poems exciting and demanding too.
Well, good. I'm sorry about the demanding. And
No.
Garrison. Garrison has issues with demanding, but I'm glad about that.
I don't mean that as a criticism.
No, I know you. I'm just joshing.
I'm going to close with a quote from one of your own poems. I mean, how good is this, really? I mean, really, seriously, how good is this? That's you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.